The blizzard came without warning, sweeping across the Wyoming territory like God's own fury. But it was nothing compared to the storm raging in Olivia Turner's heart as she pressed a cool cloth to her son's burning forehead. 6-year-old William had been fighting the fever for 3 days, each hour stealing more of his strength until his breath came in shallow gasps that tore at her soul. Pendleton, Wyoming Territory, 1875, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, but large enough that folks could still disappear if they wanted to. Olivia had been doing just that for nearly 7 years now, ever since she'd arrived pregnant and alone, fleeing memories as painful as the winter that now threatened her son's life. "Mama," William whispered, his voice cracking with the effort. "My chest hurts." "I know, sweetheart," Olivia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You just rest now, you'll be better soon." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, like the willow bark tea she'd been trying to coax down his throat. Nothing was working, not the poultices, not the teas, not her desperate prayers. Dr. Miller had diagnosed pneumonia 3 days ago before the storm hit. "He needs proper medicine, Mrs. Turner," he'd said gravely. "Without it, he hadn't needed to finish." The closest supply was in Cheyenne, nearly 100 miles away through what was now becoming the worst blizzard in 20 years. A violent gust of wind rattled the windows of their small cabin at the edge of town. Olivia pulled the blankets higher around William's tiny frame and stoked the fire, adding another precious log to the dwindling pile. Outside, the world had disappeared beneath swirling white, and inside, her world was slipping away with each labored breath her son took. The knock on her door came close to midnight, startling her from her vigil. Olivia grabbed her husband's old shotgun from beside the door, a habit she'd developed as a widow living alone with her child. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady despite her fear. "Patrick Porter, madam." "Town blacksmith." Olivia hesitated. She knew of Porter, of course everyone did. He'd arrived in Pendleton about a year ago, a quiet man who kept to himself except when working. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a reputation for fairness in business and an easy way with horses. Some said he'd been a rancher before. Others whispered he'd ridden with a notorious gang. No one knew for certain, and he never spoke of his past. She cracked open the door, shotgun still ready. The blast of frigid air made her gasp, but it was the sight of the man that stole her breath entirely. Patrick Porter stood there, snow crusting his dark beard and hat, his tall frame hunched against the wind. His blue eyes were somber in a face weathered by sun and wind. "Mrs. Turner," he said, removing his hat. "Doc Miller told me about your boy. I'm riding to Cheyenne for the medicine." Olivia stared at him, uncomprehending. "In this storm, you can't. It's suicide." His expression didn't change. "Got no choice, madam. Boy needs medicine." "Why would you do this?" she asked, searching his face. "You don't even know us." Something flickered across his features, pain, perhaps, or memory. "No child should suffer if it can be helped. Got my best horse saddled. Just need to know what medicine to fetch." A coughing fit from William pulled Olivia back to her son's bedside. Patrick followed, hovering uncertainly in the doorway of the small bedroom. William's face was flushed with fever, his blonde hair darkened with sweat. "He's getting worse," she whispered, more to herself than to Porter. Patrick approached slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. Up close, she could see the strength in his hands, blacksmith's hands, calloused and scarred from years of working hot metal. He looked down at the boy with an expression Olivia couldn't decipher. "I have the doctor's note," Olivia said, hurrying to the small table where she kept her few personal items. She handed him the paper with the medicine's name, along with the few dollars she had saved. "It's all I have." Patrick folded the note carefully and tucked it inside his coat, but he left the money on the table. Keep it. You'll need it when he's better." "I can't let you, madam," he interrupted gently. "Let me do this." Something in his voice stopped her protests. Instead, she found herself asking, "Do you have children, Mr. Porter?" The silence that followed lasted only seconds but seemed to stretch into minutes. "Had a son," he finally said. "Fever took him. His mother, too." The simple statement carried such weight that Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." He replaced his hat and moved toward the door. "I should get moving. Storm's not getting any lighter." Olivia followed him outside to the porch, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The cold stung her face immediately, and snow swirled around them in angry gusts. Patrick's horse, a powerful buckskin gelding, stood patiently at the hitching post, already laden with supplies. "That's 3 days' ride in good weather," she said, fear clutching at her heart. "I'll make it in 2. His certainty should have seemed like bravado, but instead it reassured her. "Mr. Porter," she called as he mounted. "Be careful." He tipped his hat once, then spurred his horse forward. Within seconds, the swirling snow had swallowed them both. Olivia stood in the doorway long after he disappeared, the cold numbing her fingers and face. Only William's weak cough drew her back inside, where she resumed her vigil beside his bed. "A man is coming with medicine for you," she told him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "You just need to hold on a little longer." William's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. "Is he an angel, Mama?" Olivia thought of Patrick Porter's weathered face and haunted eyes. "No, sweetheart. Just a man with a good heart." But as the night progressed and William's breathing grew more labored, she wondered if even a good heart would be enough against the fury of the blizzard raging outside. Patrick Porter leaned low over his horse's neck, one hand gripping the reins, the other pulled inside his coat for warmth. The temperature had dropped sharply in the 3 hours since he'd left Pendleton, and visibility was down to mere feet. Only his intimate knowledge of the trail kept him moving forward. That, and the memory of a small boy fighting for breath in a cabin that felt too much like the one he'd once called home. 5 years had passed since he'd lost his own family, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. Joshua had been just 4, Sarah only 26. The fever had swept through their Kansas homestead like wildfire, and by the time he'd returned from a cattle drive, he'd found himself a widower with a grave to dig. He'd wandered after that, taking work where he could find it, eventually settling in Pendleton where no one asked too many questions. The blacksmith shop had been for sale, and working metal suited him hard, honest work that left him too tired to dream at night. The trail dipped suddenly, and his buckskin Thunder stumbled in the deep snow before regaining his footing. Patrick patted the horse's neck encouragingly. "Good boy," he muttered, his words immediately torn away by the wind. "Keep going." He'd packed carefully before leaving jerky, hardtack, coffee, and a flask of whiskey for emergencies. 2 blankets, extra ammunition for his Colt, and enough grain to keep Thunder going. If he pushed hard, he might make Cheyenne in 2 days, but that would be asking a lot of his horse in this weather. The face of Olivia Turner floated before his mind's eye, delicate features framed by auburn hair, green eyes shadowed with worry but still showing the remnants of a beauty that hardship hadn't completely erased. He'd seen her in town occasionally, always with her boy, always keeping to herself. Folks said her husband had died before she arrived in Pendleton, though rumors varied on how. Patrick had never spoken to her before tonight, had no reason to. Yet when Doc Miller had mentioned in passing that the Turner boy was dying for want of medicine that couldn't be fetched in this blizzard, Patrick had found himself saddling Thunder without a second thought. By midnight, with the temperature still falling, Patrick knew he needed to find shelter. Pushing on would risk both his life and Thunder's, and that would help no one. There was an old line shack about 5 miles ahead if he could find it in this white hell. It took another hour of careful navigation before he spotted the dim outline of the shack through the driving snow. Relief flooded through him as he dismounted stiffly, his fingers so numb he could barely work the leather ties that secured his supplies. The shack was crude but sound, with a small woodpile stacked against one wall. Within minutes, Patrick had a fire going in the small stove and Thunder sheltered in the lean-to on the leeward side. He rubbed the horse down as best he could with a burlap sack, fed him some grain, then retreated to the relative warmth of the shack. As feeling painfully returned to his extremities, Patrick pulled out his small pocket watch, a reminder of better days. Nearly 1 in the morning. He'd been riding for 5 hours and had covered perhaps 15 miles. At this rate, no, he wouldn't think about failure. Not with a child's life hanging in the balance. He closed his eyes, seeing William Turner's feverish face, so like Joshua's had been. And behind that image, Olivia's worried eyes, watching him ride away into the storm like he was her last hope. Maybe he was. Patrick chewed on jerky without tasting it, washing it down with melted snow heated on the stove. Then he wrapped himself in blankets and sat with his back against the wall, determined to rest, but not sleep too deeply. He'd need to move out before dawn if he wanted any chance of making it back in time. As the fire cast shadows across the rough-hewn walls, Patrick found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. Back in Pendleton, Olivia sat by William's bed, counting his breaths in the flickering light of a single candle. Each one seemed more difficult than the last, rattling in his chest like loose pebbles in a tin can. She tried everything she knew, propping him up to ease his breathing, keeping him warm, coaxing sips of water between his cracked lips. Nothing helped. "Please," she whispered to the empty room, uncertain who she was addressing, God, fate, or the blacksmith riding through the storm. "Please don't take him from me. He's all I have." William was her miracle, her redemption. After fleeing her abusive husband in Chicago, she discovered her pregnancy while already on the road west. Thomas had never known about his son, and for that, Olivia was grateful. The man's cruelty had escalated over their 3 years of marriage until the night he'd nearly killed her. She'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few dollars sewn into her petticoat. William had been born in Pendleton, delivered by Dr. Miller in this very room. From the first moment she'd held him, Olivia had promised to give him a better life than she'd had, a life without fear, without violence. Now that life hung by a thread, dependent on a stranger's mission through impossible conditions. What kind of man risked his life for people he didn't know? The question had been turning in her mind since Patrick Porter had disappeared into the storm. His brief mention of his lost family offered some explanation, but there seemed more to it, something in his eyes that spoke of a deeper story. William stirred restlessly, murmuring in his fevered sleep. Olivia dipped the cloth in cool water again and stroked it across his forehead, humming softly, the same lullaby her own mother had sung to her long ago. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the shutters and sending drafts skittering across the floor. Olivia threw another log on the fire and pulled her shawl tighter. 2 more days, at least, before Patrick could return if he made it at all. Could William hold on that long? "You're stronger than you look," she whispered to her son. "Just like your mama. We're fighters, remember." The boy gave no sign of hearing, but Olivia kept talking anyway, desperate to fill the silence that seemed too much like death's waiting room. "When you're better, we'll go fishing at Miller's Creek," she promised. "And maybe we can get those new boots you've been wanting. You're growing so fast." Her voice broke on the last words. There had to be a future for them. There had to be. The night crawled by, each hour marked by William's labored breathing and the relentless howling of the wind. Just before dawn, a knock at the door startled Olivia from her half-doze. For one wild moment, she thought it might be Patrick, returning impossibly fast. But when she opened the door, she found Martha Jenkins, the shopkeeper's wife, standing there with a covered basket. "Thought you might need some provisions," Martha said, stepping inside and stamping snow from her boots. "Good Lord, it's getting worse out there. How's the boy?" "The same," Olivia replied, accepting the basket gratefully. Inside were bread, preserves, a small pot of stew, and most precious, more firewood bundled in cloth. "I heard Porter rode out to fetch medicine," Martha said, moving to William's bedside and clucking sympathetically. "Brave man, foolish but brave. You think he'll make it?" Olivia couldn't keep the desperation from her voice. Martha hesitated, which was answer enough. If anyone can, it would be him. Man's as stubborn as they come. Fixed my husband's wagon last spring when everyone said it was beyond repair. She stayed long enough to help Olivia change William's sweat-soaked bedding and spoon some broth into him. As she prepared to leave, she squeezed Olivia's hand. "Town's praying for your boy," she said. "And for Porter, too. Strange man, keeps to himself, but there's good in him. Real good." After Martha left, Olivia found herself wondering about Patrick Porter anew. What had brought him to Pendleton? What ghosts was he running from? And would he return, or would the storm claim him as it had claimed so many others who had underestimated its fury? She could only wait and hope, and continue her vigil as the blizzard raged outside. Dawn found Patrick already on the trail, having left the line shack well before first light. The storm had intensified overnight, and now he rode through a world transformed into endless white. The cold had settled deep in his bones despite his heavy coat and woolen layers. His beard was crusted with ice, and even thunder seemed subdued, plodding forward with head lowered against the driving snow. By midday, the landscape began to change, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills that would eventually lead to the more rugged terrain before Cheyenne. Patrick knew they should be passing the Jenkins' old homestead, soon abandoned years ago after repeated Indian raids, but the stone chimney still stood as a landmark. Hours passed with no sign of it. Patrick felt the first tendrils of worry creep into his mind. Had he veered off course? In this weather, a wrong turn could be fatal. He pulled Thunder to a halt, squinting through the swirling snow. Nothing but white in all directions. The wind had shifted, now coming from the north instead of the west, further disorienting him. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the horse, who stomped restlessly. "We'll figure this out." Patrick closed his eyes, trying to picture the map he'd studied before leaving. The Jenkins place should be east of the trail with a creek running behind it, if he could find the creek. He turned Thunder slightly east and nudged him forward. They'd gone perhaps half a mile when the ground suddenly dropped away beneath them. Thunder whinnied in panic as he slid down the hidden embankment, hooves scrambling for purchase in the deep snow. Patrick tried to hold on, but the sudden jolt threw him from the saddle. He tumbled through the air for one disorienting moment before landing hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Pain exploded in his left arm as he hit the frozen ground. For several minutes, Patrick could only lie there, struggling to breathe through the agony. Thunder stood nearby, reins dangling, looking surprisingly unharmed. When Patrick finally managed to sit up, he knew immediately that his arm was broken. The bone hadn't punctured the skin, but the unnatural angle left no doubt. "Damn," he muttered, the word forming a white cloud in the frigid air. The situation had just become significantly more complicated. He couldn't properly ride with a broken arm, yet turning back wasn't an option. not with William Turner's life hanging in the balance. Using his belt and bandana, Patrick fashioned a crude sling for his arm, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through his body. It took 3 attempts to remount Thunder, and when he finally settled in the saddle, cold sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. "Forward," he told the horse, his voice rough with pain. "Just forward." They continued east, and within an hour, Patrick's gamble paid off. The ruins of the Jenkins homestead appeared through the snow little more than a chimney and foundation stones now, but a welcome sight nonetheless. He'd strayed from the trail, but now he could correct his course. Night was falling as Patrick guided Thunder back to the main trail. The temperature was dropping again, and he knew they needed to find shelter soon. His broken arm throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and the constant pain was wearing him down. Another hour brought them to Cottonwood Creek, now frozen solid enough to cross safely. On the other side stood an abandoned way station, used in the days before the stagecoach routes had changed. Patrick had stayed there once before and knew it would provide adequate shelter. The building was little more than a large cabin with a stable attached, but it was sound enough. Patrick managed to unsaddle Thunder one-handed and get him settled with some grain. Inside, he found the old stove still in working order and soon had a small fire going. The exertion had cost him, though. By the time he collapsed onto one of the wooden bunks built into the wall, Patrick was shaking with exhaustion and pain. He knew he should eat something, but the thought of moving again was unbearable. Instead, he fumbled in his pocket for Doc Miller's note, unfolding it carefully to read the medicine's name again. Quinine and some other drug he couldn't pronounce. The doc had said the boy had pneumonia and without proper treatment. Patrick closed his eyes, seeing again the small figure in the bed, chest heaving with each labored breath. And beside him, Olivia Turner's face, etched with worry but still beautiful in a way that had caught him off guard. He'd noticed her around town, of course. A man would have to be blind not to. But Patrick had made it a policy to keep to himself since arriving in Pendleton. Getting involved with people meant questions about his past, and that was territory he preferred to avoid. Yet here he was, riding through a blizzard for her child with a broken arm and at least another day's hard travel to Cheyenne. "You're a fool, Porter," he muttered to the empty room. Maybe so. But he'd made a promise, and Patrick Porter didn't break his promises. Not anymore. With that thought, he drifted into an uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with fevered children and women with worried green eyes, all set against endless fields of driving snow. The second day of Patrick's absence dawned gray and forbidding in Pendleton. Olivia had barely slept, dozing fitfully beside William's bed. The boy's condition had worsened overnight, his breathing now so labored that each intake of air seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Dr. Miller arrived shortly after sunrise, his aged face grave as he examined William. "He's fighting hard," he said, replacing his stethoscope in his bag, "but without that medicine." He trailed off, unable to offer false hope. "Mr. Porter will bring it," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. "He promised." The doctor nodded, though his expression remained doubtful. "Porter's a good man. If anyone can make it through this storm, it's him." He handed Olivia a small packet. "Willow bark powder. Mix it with honey if you can get him to take it. It won't cure him, but it might help with the fever." After the doctor left, Olivia tried to go about her daily routine, stoking the fire, preparing a simple breakfast she couldn't eat, attempting to coax some broth into William. Ordinary actions that felt like play acting while her heart trembled with fear. Around midday, the storm briefly lessened, and Olivia stepped outside to gather more firewood from the small stack by the side of the cabin. The town of Pendleton lay spread before her, nearly unrecognizable under its blanket of white. Smoke rose from chimneys, the only sign that life continued beneath the snow. For a moment, Olivia allowed herself to imagine Patrick Porter out there somewhere, still pushing forward despite the elements. Was he warm enough? Had he found shelter last night? Would he find the medicine in Cheyenne? Would he make it back in time? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Sheriff Davis approaching until he called her name. "Mrs. Turner," he said, tipping his hat. "Thought I'd check in on you and the boy. Quite a storm we're having." "Thank you, Sheriff. William is holding on." She hesitated, then asked the question foremost in her mind. "Have you heard anything about Mr. Porter?" The sheriff shook his head. "Not likely to in this weather. But he knows the trail to Cheyenne better than most. Used to ride as a cavalry scout during the war, from what I understand." This was news to Olivia. "He was in the war, Union cavalry. Don't know much beyond that. Porter doesn't talk about his past, and folks here respect that." Sheriff Davis gestured toward her woodpile. "Need help bringing in some of that." Olivia accepted his assistance gratefully, and the sheriff carried in enough wood to last at least 2 more days. Before leaving, he awkwardly patted her shoulder. "Town's behind you, Mrs. Turner. Anything you need, you just send word." His kindness almost undid her, and Olivia had to blink back tears. "Thank you." After he left, Olivia returned to William's bedside. The boy was awake, his eyes glassy with fever but focused on her face. "Mama," he whispered, "did the man come back?" "Not yet, sweetheart," she said, smoothing his hair. "But he will." "I dreamed about him," William said, his voice so faint Olivia had to lean close to hear. "He was riding through snow and his arm hurt." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through Olivia. "It was just a dream," she assured him, though the image lingered uncomfortably. William drifted back to sleep, and Olivia sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Each breath seemed more precious than gold. Each moment he continued fighting a small miracle. Night fell early, as it did in Wyoming winters. Olivia lit the lamps and stoked the fire, creating a small circle of warmth against the encroaching darkness. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling around the cabin's corners like a living thing. She thought of Patrick out there somewhere in that maelstrom, a man she barely knew risking everything for her son. The realization made her feel both profoundly grateful and desperately worried. If something happened to him because of their need. Olivia shook her head, banishing the thought. He'd made his choice. All she could do now was wait and hope and continue her vigil over her son. In the silence broken only by William's labored breathing and the crackling of the fire, Olivia began to sing softly an old lullaby her mother had taught her, about angels watching over children as they slept. Her voice was thin and sometimes broke on the higher notes, but she sang anyway, as if the simple melody could form a shield around her son, protecting him until help arrived. Patrick woke to pain and cold. His arm throbbed mercilessly, and sometime during the night the fire in the stove had died, leaving the way station frigid. Outside, the storm continued unabated, wind shrieking past the shuttered windows. It took nearly an hour to get moving rebuilding the fire with one hand, forcing himself to eat some jerky, checking on Thunder in the attached stable. The horse, at least, seemed to have recovered from yesterday's mishap, eagerly accepting the grain Patrick offered. By the time he mounted up, the sky had lightened to a uniform gray. The snow was still falling heavily, but the wind had shifted again, now at his back rather than cutting into his face. A small mercy, but Patrick would take whatever advantages came his way. He estimated they were still about 30 miles from Cheyenne. In good weather, that would be an easy day's ride. "In this blizzard with a broken arm, 1 mile at a time," he told Thunder as they set out. "Just 1 mile at a time." The day became a blur of white pain and white landscape. Patrick focused on staying in the saddle, keeping them moving generally southeast toward Cheyenne. Twice they had to detour around drifts too deep to safely cross. Once they startled a small herd of deer, ghostly shapes appearing and disappearing in the swirling snow. By mid-afternoon, Patrick's vision was beginning to blur at the edges, exhaustion and pain taking their toll. He'd been alternating between shivering violently and feeling unnaturally warm signs of fever that he recognized, but chose to ignore. There was no time for illness, not with a child's life hanging in the balance. The first outlying buildings of Cheyenne appeared just as dusk was falling, rough wooden structures half buried in snow. Patrick felt a surge of relief so profound it nearly unseated him. They'd made it. The town was eerily quiet under its blanket of snow, with few people braving the elements. Those who did stared at Patrick as he rode past, a man half frozen in the saddle with one arm in a makeshift sling. He made directly for the town's apothecary, praying it would still be open. The small shop on the corner of the main street showed a light in its window, another small mercy. The bell above the door jangled as Patrick entered, bringing the proprietor hurrying from the back room. Mr. Abernathy was a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression. "Good heavens, man," he exclaimed, taking in Patrick's appearance. "You look half dead. Sit down before you fall down." Patrick shook his head, fumbling in his coat for the doctor's note. "Medicine," he managed, his voice a hoarse croak. "Need this for a boy in Pendleton. Pneumonia." Abernathy took the note, glancing from it to Patrick's face with growing concern. "Pendleton? That's 2 days' ride in good weather. You came through this storm." 3 days, Patrick corrected, swaying slightly on his feet. "Need to start back tonight." "That's madness," Abernathy protested. "You're injured, exhausted, boy's dying," Patrick interrupted. "Please, just fill the prescription." Something in his tone must have convinced the apothecary, who nodded reluctantly and moved to his shelves of bottles and powders. While he worked, Patrick leaned heavily against the counter, fighting to stay upright. "Your arm needs setting," Abernathy commented as he measured powder into small paper packets. "Dr. Wilkins is just down the street." Patrick shook his head. "No time. At least stay the night. No one can ride in this storm after dark. It would be suicide." But Patrick was already counting out coins from his pouch. "How much?" Abernathy sighed, recognizing the futility of further argument. $3 for both medicines." "But I'm adding some laudanum for your pain, and that's not negotiable." Patrick paid without protest, tucking the precious packets and small bottle into his inside coat pocket where they'd stay dry. "Thank you. God go with you," Abernathy said, genuine concern in his voice. "That boy must mean a lot to you." Patrick paused at the door, considering. "Never met him before 3 days ago," he admitted, but his mother's eyes when she asked for help. He trailed off, unable to explain the compulsion that had driven him into the blizzard. Understanding dawned on Abernathy's face. "Ah, well, that explains it then. Good luck, friend." Outside, Patrick took a moment to let the laudanum begin dulling his pain before remounting Thunder. The horse seemed to understand the importance of their mission, standing patiently despite the driving snow. "Heading home now, boy," Patrick told him, patting his neck. "Back to Pendleton." As they moved through Cheyenne's deserted streets toward the Western Trail, Patrick found his thoughts turning to Olivia Turner. Was she still maintaining her vigil by her son's bedside? Was the boy still fighting? Would they arrive in time? The questions drove him forward into the gathering darkness. each hoofbeat bringing them one step closer to Pendleton and to the answers that waited there. 3 days had passed since Patrick Porter had ridden away from Olivia's cabin, and hope was dwindling with each passing hour. William's condition had deteriorated to the point where he no longer woke, his breathing shallow and irregular. Dr. Miller visited twice daily now, his expression growing more somber with each examination. "You should prepare yourself," he had said that morning, his voice gentle but firm. "The boy is very weak." Olivia had nodded numbly, the words washing over her without fully penetrating. Prepare herself. How could anyone prepare to lose their child, their reason for living? The townspeople had been kind, bringing food she couldn't eat and firewood to keep the cabin warm. Martha Jenkins had sat with her for hours, allowing Olivia to briefly rest. Sheriff Davis stopped by regularly, though he never brought the news she desperately wanted to hear, that Patrick Porter had been sighted returning to town. As night fell on the 3rd day, the blizzard finally began to abate, the wind dropping to occasional gusts rather than the constant howling that had been her companion for days. Olivia stood at the window, staring out at the moonlight now visible through breaks in the clouds. The world sparkled, beautiful and deadly. "Please," she whispered, unsure if she was praying to God or directly addressing the man somewhere out in that frozen landscape. "Please come back." William stirred restlessly, and Olivia returned to his side, taking his small hand in hers. It felt too warm, too frail. "The snow is stopping," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear. "Soon the sun will come out and spring will follow. We'll plant those sunflower seeds we saved, remember? The ones that will grow taller than the roof." Her voice broke, and Olivia fell silent, watching her son's face in the lamplight. He'd always been small for his age, but now he looked positively tiny, swallowed up by the bed and blankets. The sound came so faintly at first that Olivia thought she'd imagined it the distant crunch of hooves on snow. She held her breath, listening. There it was again, drawing closer. Hope surged through her with such force that her knees nearly buckled. Olivia rushed to the door, flinging it open without bothering with a shawl. The moonlight illuminated a solitary figure on horseback, moving slowly through the snow toward her cabin. Even at a distance, Olivia could see the rider was slumped forward, barely staying in the saddle. "Mr. Porter." She called, her voice carrying in the still night air. The rider straightened slightly at her call, raising a hand in acknowledgement. As he drew closer, Olivia gasped at his appearance. Patrick Porter's face was haggard, his beard crusted with ice, and his left arm was secured in what looked like a makeshift sling. "The medicine," he said as he drew his horse to a halt before her. His voice was a hoarse rasp, barely recognizable. "In my coat pocket." Olivia hurried forward as Patrick attempted to dismount. He swayed dangerously, and she reached up to steady him, feeling the heat of fever radiating through his clothes despite the bitter cold. "You're ill," she said, helping him down from the saddle. "Doesn't matter. The boy." Patrick fumbled inside his coat with his good hand, producing several small packets and a bottle. "Doc said to dissolve the powder in water, give him a spoonful every 4 hours, the others for the fever." Olivia took the precious medicine, fighting back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to go," he interrupted, gesturing toward the cabin. "He needs it now." She hesitated, torn between rushing to William and helping the clearly injured man before her. "Your horse, I'll see to thunder. Go to your son." His tone brooked no argument. Olivia nodded and hurried back inside, where she quickly dissolved the powder as instructed. With trembling hands, she lifted William's head and carefully spooned the medicine into his mouth, massaging his throat to make him swallow. "That's it," she murmured. "Good boy. This will make you better." When she was certain William had received the proper dose, Olivia returned outside to find Patrick leaning heavily against the porch railing, having apparently managed to unsaddle his horse and turn it into the small corral beside the cabin. "Mr. Porter," she began, then gasped as he stumbled, nearly falling. Olivia rushed forward to catch him, staggering under his weight. "Come inside. You need to get warm." He didn't protest as she led him into the cabin and helped him to the chair by the fire. Up close, Olivia could see the extent of his exhaustion, the sunken eyes, the lines of pain etched deeply around his mouth, the unnatural flush of fever on his cheeks. "Your arm is broken," she said, noting how carefully he held it. "Fell yesterday, or the day before. It's all." He gestured vaguely, his words slurring slightly. "Blurry." Olivia filled a cup with water and held it to his lips. "Drink. Then I need to look at that arm." Patrick drank deeply, then leaned back in the chair, eyes closing. For a moment, Olivia thought he had fallen asleep, but then he asked, "The boy, will he be all right?" "Thanks to you, I believe he will," Olivia replied, her throat tight with emotion. "You've saved his life, Mr. Porter." "Patrick," he murmured. "My name's Patrick." "Patrick," she repeated softly, "and I'm Olivia." A faint smile touched his lips. "I know." Before she could respond, he slumped further in the chair, unconsciousness finally claiming him. Olivia quickly checked William, who seemed to be resting more peacefully already, then turned her attention to the man who had risked everything to save her son. Removing his coat was a challenge, but Olivia managed it gently, wincing at his involuntary groans when his broken arm was disturbed. Beneath the coat, his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold, confirming her suspicion that he was running a high fever. The arm was badly swollen but thankfully showed no signs of the bone having broken the skin. Olivia had set broken bones before a necessary skill on the frontier, but this would need to wait until he was more stable. For now, she fashioned a better sling from a clean pillowcase, then covered him with a blanket. For the rest of the night, Olivia moved between the two patients, her son and the stranger who had become their salvation. She administered William's medicine at the prescribed intervals, bathed Patrick's face to bring down his fever, and kept the fire well stoked against the continuing cold. Just before dawn, William's fever broke. Olivia was wiping his face when his eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been in days. "Mama," he whispered. Tears of relief spilled down Olivia's cheeks. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be fine now." William's gaze moved past her to the man slumped in the chair. "Is that the angel?" Olivia followed his gaze, taking in Patrick's battered form, the broken arm, the frost-nipped fingers, the exhaustion etched in every line of his face even in sleep. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe he might be." As the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, Olivia Turner felt something she had almost forgotten: hope, spreading through her heart like the warmth of the fire that had kept them all alive through the long, cold night. Patrick drifted in and out of consciousness for the better part of 2 days. When awake, he was often confused, his fever-bright eyes searching the cabin until they found Olivia or William, then relaxing once he confirmed they were safe. Dr. Miller came to check on William, pronouncing his improvement remarkable and nothing short of miraculous. When he examined Patrick, however, his expression grew grave. "The arm needs to be set properly," he told Olivia, "and he's fighting a nasty chest infection. Probably pneumonia like William had, not surprising given what he's put his body through." He left Olivia with medicine for Patrick and instructions for setting the broken bone. "Wait until he's lucid," the doctor advised. "It won't be pleasant." By the evening of the second day, Patrick's fever had lowered enough that he was fully conscious when Olivia brought him a bowl of soup. "William," he asked immediately, his voice rough but stronger. "Much better," Olivia assured him, helping him sit up straighter in the chair that had become his sick bed. "The medicine worked wonders. Dr. Miller says he'll make a full recovery." Relief washed over Patrick's features. "Good, that's good." Olivia hesitated, then said, "The doctor also examined your arm. It needs to be set." Patrick glanced down at the limb, still secured in her makeshift sling. "I figured as much. Not my first broken bone." "I can do it," Olivia offered. "I've set bones before." "Or we can wait for the doctor to return tomorrow." "Let's get it over with," Patrick decided. "No sense in putting it off." Olivia nodded, admiring his courage despite her apprehension about causing him pain. "I'll need to prepare a few things." While Patrick finished his soup, Olivia gathered what she would need: strips of wood for splints, clean bandages, and the small bottle of laudanum the doctor had left. She also poured a generous measure of whiskey from her small stock. "For the pain," she explained, handing him the glass. Patrick accepted it with a nod of thanks. "I'm sorry to be such a burden," he said after taking a swallow. "You should be focusing on William, not tending to me." "William is recovering nicely," Olivia assured him. "And you're hardly a burden, Mr. Porter, not after what you did for us." "Patrick," he reminded her. "Patrick," she agreed with a small smile. "And after all this, I think you should call me Olivia." A shadow of an answering smile touched his lips. "Olivia, then." She offered him the laudanum next, which he took without protest. While waiting for it to take effect, Olivia checked on William, who was sleeping peacefully in his bedroom, his breathing finally clear and unlabored. When she returned to Patrick, she found him staring into the fire, his expression distant. "I had a son," he said without preamble. "Joshua. He would have been 9 this year." Olivia sat in the chair opposite him, recognizing the need in him to speak of his loss. "What happened?" she asked gently. "Scarlet fever. Took him and my wife, Sarah, within days of each other." Patrick's voice was flat, as if reciting facts that belonged to someone else's life. "I was away when it happened. Came home to find them both gone." "I'm so sorry," Olivia said, the words inadequate but sincere. Patrick nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "When I heard about your boy, I just couldn't let it happen again. Not if there was something I could do." The simple statement explained everything: the impossible journey, the broken arm, the risk to his own life. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "Well," she said, swallowing past the lump in her throat, "we're both very grateful that you did." Patrick looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing past the exhaustion and worry of the past days to the woman beneath. "You've had your share of hardship too," he observed. "I can see it in your eyes." Olivia hesitated, unaccustomed to speaking of her past, but after what this man had done for her family, she owed him at least the truth. "I left an abusive husband in Chicago," she said quietly. "Discovered I was carrying William on the journey west. We've been on our own ever since. He never came looking for you. He doesn't know about William, and I doubt he cared enough to search for me once I was gone." Olivia straightened her shoulders. "It was the best decision I ever made, leaving. William has never known fear or violence in his home and never will." Patrick nodded, approval in his eyes. "You're a brave woman, Olivia Turner. And you're a brave man, Patrick Porter." She gestured to his arm. "Now shall we get this over with?" Setting the bone was every bit as unpleasant as the doctor had warned. Despite the laudanum and whiskey, Patrick couldn't suppress a groan of pain when Olivia manipulated the broken ends back into alignment. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he remained still, his jaw clenched tight. "Almost done," Olivia assured him, working quickly to secure the splints with bandages. "You're doing well." When she had finished, Patrick exhaled slowly, his face pale. "Thank you." "Rest now," she instructed, helping him to a more comfortable position. Doctor's orders. A faint smile touched his lips. Yes, madam. Olivia squeezed his good hand briefly, then rose to tend to the fire. Behind her, Patrick's breathing soon deepened into sleep, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion and pain of the past days. In the quiet of the cabin, with both her patients sleeping peacefully, Olivia found herself studying Patrick's face in repose. The hard lines of weariness had softened, making him appear younger, more vulnerable. She thought of what he had revealed: the loss of his family, the guilt of not being there when they needed him, the redemption he had sought in saving her son. What kind of man risked everything for strangers? The answer, she was beginning to realize, was the kind of man she hadn't believed existed anymore, one of profound courage and deeper compassion. As Olivia finally allowed herself to rest in the chair opposite Patrick, she acknowledged the warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was too soon to name it, this feeling. But it was there nonetheless, taking root in the fertile soil of gratitude and admiration. Spring came early to Pendleton that year. By mid-March, the snow had mostly melted, leaving the streets muddy but passable. Green shoots appeared in Olivia's small garden, and the air carried the promise of warmer days ahead. William had recovered completely from his illness, with no lingering effects save a slightly increased protectiveness from his mother. He had taken to following Patrick around whenever the blacksmith visited, which was increasingly often as his own health improved. Patrick's arm had healed well, though Dr. Miller warned it might always ache before rain. He had returned to his blacksmith shop as soon as he was able, the familiar work of shaping metal helping to rebuild the strength in his injured arm. On this particular Sunday afternoon, Patrick arrived at Olivia's cabin bearing a small wooden box. William ran to meet him, excitedly grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the garden, where Olivia was planting the sunflower seeds they had saved from the previous year. "Mr. Patrick brought something, Mama," William announced. Olivia looked up, smiling at the sight of them, her son's hand engulfed in Patrick's much larger one, both of their faces alight with matching expressions of anticipation. In the months since the blizzard, Patrick had become a regular presence in their lives, first as a patient, then as a friend, and now as something neither of them had yet defined but both felt deepening with each passing day. "Is that so?" she asked, brushing dirt from her hands as she stood. "Should I be concerned?" Patrick's laugh was something she treasured, a sound that had been rare when she first met him, but now came more freely. "Nothing dangerous, I promise." He presented the box to William, who opened it eagerly to reveal a small wooden horse, expertly carved and polished to a warm glow. "Did you make this?" William gasped, turning the toy over in his hands. "I did," Patrick confirmed. "Thought you might like a reminder of Thunder, who helped bring your medicine." "It's perfect, thank you." William threw his arms around Patrick's waist in an exuberant hug that the man returned without hesitation. "Why don't you go show Mrs. Jenkins next door?" Olivia suggested. "She mentioned wanting to give you some of her honey cookies earlier." William needed no further encouragement, dashing off toward the neighboring cabin with his treasure clutched carefully in his hands. "That was very thoughtful," Olivia said when they were alone. "He adores you, you know." Patrick's expression softened. "The feeling is mutual. He's a fine boy, Olivia. You've done well with him." "We've both done better since you came into our lives," she replied honestly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the spring sun warm on their faces. Patrick seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been thinking," he finally said, "about the future." Olivia's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Oh, my business is doing well. The railroad contract came through, which means steady work for the foreseeable future." He hesitated, then continued more decisively. I've been saving to build a proper house. The rooms above the smithy are fine for a bachelor, but not for a family. The implication hung in the air between them, neither fully articulated nor denied. A family needs space, Olivia agreed carefully, watching his face. Patrick took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Olivia, I know it hasn't been that long since everything happened, and I understand if you need more time, but I want you to know that my feelings for you, for both of you, are serious. Patrick, let me finish, please, he said gently. I lost my family once, and I never thought I'd find that kind of happiness again. Never thought I deserved it. But then that blizzard came, and somehow in the middle of all that cold and pain, I found something I wasn't even looking for. He took her hands in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I found you and William. And if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life with you both. Olivia felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. Are you asking me to marry you, Patrick Porter? I am, he confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. Though I'm making a mess of it, I'm afraid. On the contrary, Olivia said, stepping closer until there was barely space between them. I think you're doing just fine. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. Is that a yes, then? In answer, Olivia rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was sweet and unhurried, a promise of all the days to come. When they parted, Patrick's eyes were bright with emotion. I'll take that as a yes. It most definitely is, Olivia confirmed, her heart full to bursting. William will be thrilled. He's been asking when you're going to come live with us permanently. Patrick laughed, the sound joyful and unrestrained. Smart boy, takes after his mother. From next door came the sound of William's excited chatter as he returned from Mrs. Jenkins' house, likely with pockets full of cookies. Patrick and Olivia stepped apart slightly but kept their hands entwined. Should we tell him now? Patrick asked. Olivia nodded, squeezing his hand. No time like the present. As William bounded toward them, face alight with the simple joy of cookies and a new toy, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led them all here had been difficult, marked by loss and hardship. But standing in her garden with the man who had risked everything to save her son, watching that same son run toward them with complete trust and happiness, Olivia knew they had found their way home at last. They were married in June, when wildflowers covered the Wyoming prairie in a riot of color. The entire town of Pendleton turned out for the celebration, grateful not only for the excuse to feast and dance, but also to witness the union of two people whose story had become something of a local legend. The house Patrick had promised was built by then, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and plenty of room for a family to grow. Olivia had planted sunflowers along the south side, just as she'd promised William during his illness, and by their wedding day, the bright yellow blooms were already stretching toward the sky. William stood proudly as his mother's attendant, dressed in his first proper suit, and taking his responsibilities very seriously. When the preacher pronounced Patrick and Olivia husband and wife, the boy was the first to cheer, throwing his arms around both of them in an embrace that symbolized their new family more perfectly than any ceremony could. Later, as lanterns were lit for the dancing and the summer twilight stretched long across the plains, Patrick found a moment alone with his new wife. Happy? He asked, drawing her away from the celebration and into the shadow of their new home. Olivia leaned into his embrace, her wedding dress rustling softly in the evening breeze. More than I ever thought possible. Me too, he admitted, dropping a kiss on her upturned face. Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate I am. If that blizzard hadn't come, then some other twist of fate would have brought us together, Olivia said with certainty. Some things are just meant to be. Patrick smiled, the last of the sun's rays catching the gold in his beard. I think you might be right about that, Mrs. Porter. The name sent a thrill through Olivia. After so many years of hardship and uncertainty, she had found not just safety but true partnership and love. Patrick had given her son a father who cherished him, given her a home built with love, given her a future bright with promise. I know I am, she replied, rising on tiptoe to seal the assertion with a kiss. From the celebration behind them came William's laughter, bright and clear in the evening air. Soon they would rejoin their guests, accept the community's good wishes, dance under the stars as husband and wife. But for now, they held this moment between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here, and the journey they would now share together. In the years that followed, Pendleton would grow and change with the expanding frontier. The railroad would bring new faces and opportunities, and the small town would evolve into something larger and more prosperous. But those who had been there during that terrible blizzard of 1875 would never forget the story of the blacksmith who rode 3 days through impossible conditions to save a child he'd never met, and in doing so, found a family he never expected. For Patrick and Olivia Porter, that blizzard marked not an ending but a beginning. Their family grew with the addition of twin boys 2 years after their marriage, followed by a daughter 3 years later. William thrived under Patrick's guidance, eventually following his stepfather into the blacksmith trade before opening his own successful business. And every winter, when the first snow fell on Pendleton, Patrick would gather his family close and tell them the story of how a desperate ride through a blizzard had led him to the greatest treasure a man could find, not gold or silver, but the love of a woman with courage in her heart and a boy with fight in his spirit. It was a reminder to them all that sometimes the darkest storms bring the greatest blessings, and that love, once found, was worth any hardship to protect and cherish.